now delighted to be joined online by Bill Fichtner in our special series Icons of Acting. And I suppose, Bill, starting off, I have to say, 1978 you got a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice, and that sort of goes down the sort of career of police detective, sergeant, science laboratories. It's a different world, maybe 50, 60 years on from what you got your degree in to what you made yourself in your life today.
Yeah, that was a real left-hand turn, huh?
Yeah.
After college. Listen, I went to school. To be honest with you, I really wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but criminal justice, I think my father suggested it, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I know that I wanted to go to college. That was the most important thing. But then when I got to college, I was a criminal justice major for all 4 years, but I had to take a couple of theater classes. I needed one, a fine arts course to graduate, and I took an improv class, and I just, I had a great teacher who was really super supportive. I'd never did anything like that before. I didn't act in high school. I didn't even go to any high school plays. I usually skipped out the back door so we could go have a beer.
Yeah.
By the time I graduated school, my mind was open to other things, so I got my degree, and I said, well, that's a mighty nice degree. Let me put that on the shelf, and moved to New York, and went to study and see if I could, become an actor.
Yeah, and William, before I bring you on to New York, I'm just going to flash back. You were born in New York, and your genealogy, Bill Fichtner, you have a bit of German, you have a bit of Irish, and a bit of English descent all mixed into you, and your family is well travelled.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. I did one of those ancestry tests,
Yeah.
They're all different kinds right now. Ancestry.com and 23andMe and that. I always thought that I was predominantly German. My mother's maiden name was a German name. Fichtner is a German name, spelled with, Fichtner. I always thought I was German until I got the results back, and it was like, listen, you're more English and Irish than you are German. I was like, well, that's a surprise to me. So, well-traveled is the way to put it. But listen, I'm an American mutt. There's a lot of stuff in the mix, and I certainly don't know any relative that came from Europe or came from Ireland. My family's been around here for a long time, so, I figured myself a Buffalo guy.
A Buffalo guy indeed, Bill. And I suppose, Bill, you mentioned there you went to New York to pursue the dream, and you sort of got your first break in the sort of world of soap operas and sitcoms like Grace Under Fire, which was a big sort of breakout sort of story for you, playing the role of Ryan Sparks.
When I got to New York,
Yeah,
when I first got to New York, I honestly, I wasn't interested in finding a job. I was interested in finding a good class so I could figure out what I was doing.
Okay.
I mean, by the time I got there when I was 21, I graduated college a little bit early, or young, I should say. And, it's my old Buffalo sensibilities. I didn't want to, the old expression, I didn't want to put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to New York and learn how to act. I didn't act. I took a few classes, but that certainly, in my mind, didn't qualify me as being an actor. So I was very interested in going to New York and studying, which I did. I don't think I even auditioned in New York for the first maybe 3 years I was there. I just studied. I just read books and worked and did scenes and, tried to get a sense of a way of working before. And then, one of the first things, so I worked on theater in New York. But then one of the first things that came along that was in front of a camera was a daytime soap opera. And I have to tell you, I almost didn't take that job because I was like, oh, man, I don't want to be a daytime soap actor,
Yeah.
I just wasn't in my dream. But, hindsight being 20/20, I'm mighty grateful that I did do it, because I'll tell you something. For the next 2 years, I was in front of that camera every day. And I was so nervous in the beginning, but after a while, not that I got complacent about it, but I certainly learned how to be in front of it and to be comfortable with it. And, that was invaluable for later on. But the truth is, I did theater, I did some television, but I didn't get my first film. And it's not like I didn't want to get a movie, but I didn't get hired for my first movie until I was 36 years old, which is, everybody else that I knew in New York was certainly working in movies by then. I was just a late bloomer when it came to working in film.
Yeah, and I suppose, Bill, in relation to that, you spoke about the first bit of nervous tension that you had shooting that sitcom Grace Under Fire. Even to this day now in big blockbuster movies, do you still get that bit of nervous tension, that bit of butterflies in the stomach when you get a new script? Do you maybe even question yourself even to this day?
No, I honest with you, and I've said this so many times over the years, and a lot of it, going back to that 2 years working on that daytime soap opera, and being okay being in front of the camera. But now, I got to be honest with you, if I'm working on a set and there's 100 people in the crew and they set that camera up about 12 inches from my nose, it's my peaceful place. I don't feel like that. In the beginning, for sure. In the beginning, especially with Grace Under Fire, that's shot in front of a live audience with cameras, and there was, I had the jitters a little bit and wondering like, oh man, am I getting this right? But I don't feel that way anymore. Now I work on this show called Mom. Yeah. Which I have to tell you, listen, I've done two sitcoms in my entire life. They both happen to be Chuck Lorre shows, who's like the king of comedy on television here. And the only person that ever hired me for something like this is the same guy. I worked on Grace Under Fire. I never did anything like that. And then 25 years later, he called me up to come and work on this show, Mom. Yeah. But I love it. I love this. It's like really, it's unlike anything else, and I love doing it. I mean, I love working on films more than anything. Yeah. But it is really great, and I love mixing it up, and working on a show like Mom right now is truly mixing it up.
Yeah, and I suppose, Bill, there's so many films that if I had to talk about them all, I'd be here for the next 2 hours. So I'm just going to skim through and pick out a few that come to mind. And I'm just going to start off with the very first one that struck me, and it was probably something that introduced you to the whole sort of film world. You had a small sort of role in it. It was a big movie in its time. It was the breakout movie for Denzel Washington, Malcolm X, in 1992. What was that experience like for you, being on such a big, massive production like that, and Denzel starting off in his career as well? Did you see the stardom that he was on his path to as well?
Well, here's the interesting thing about that. Now, this is true story. So, Malcolm X would have been my first film that I ever truly did. I played a small, extra in a film, but I don't really count that. Yeah. But Malcolm X would have been the first film. It was a part of a cop. It was a one-scene part. The day before I was to shoot that scene, I was, and I was so happy. I mean, I was like, oh man, I finally got a job in a real film. And the day before, I got a call the night before, and they said they wrote the scene out. And I was like, what? What do you mean they wrote the scene out? They said they decided to cut the scene. But Screen Actors Guild, if you tell an actor the day before, I'm not sure what the rule is, but they had to pay me for it. Okay. And they paid me for it, and they put it on IMDb or whatever in the credits that I worked on it. The truth is, I never did. Okay. They paid me for the film for doing that scene, but I never worked in the scene. Okay. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I always consider the Underneath, the indie film, Steven Soderbergh film, as being the first film that I did. The next film that I did was called Virtuosity, and that was with
Yeah.
But I never did Malcolm X. I was never in the film.
Okay. And you've mentioned their virtuosity, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Real favourite film of mine. I remember watching it growing back up when I was in my younger sort of days. A real sort of blockbuster movie with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, Heat. A real sort of an intense sort of a thriller.
Yeah, it's funny because I saw that, the other day. It was playing on one of the cable stations late at night. And one of the scenes came up that I was in, and I looked at my wife and I said, "Oh my God, look at me! I look like I'm 12 years old." That was one of the first things that I worked on, and that was a good thing for an actor just starting out in film, because it was an interesting part. But also too, I learned something when I did the film Virtuosity.
Yeah,
that was the one time in my life that I did a film, and they cut about 90% of what I shot.
Okay.
Didn't make it in the movie. And I remember when I read the script Heat, and I called my agent and I said, "Listen, it's not a big part, but I can tell you right now, they can't cut it out of the movie."
Okay.
Because each scene is integral to the telling of this story.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm in. It's Michael Mann, it's Pacino and De Niro, and it's not a big role, but there's something to do here. So yeah, that movie really stands the test of time too.
Oh, classic, yeah.
Still good.
Oh, so good, yeah. And Bill, I'll fast forward now. Two other movies, and two movies with differing sort of contrasts. The Perfect Storm, a sort of weatherology sort of movie in relation to exposing harsh, severe sort of conditions. And then we all know the historic blockbuster, which was Pearl Harbor as well. And I'll throw in a third one there as well, because it was just on the same year, Black Hawk Down as well, where you played Sanderson. Three real movies again that stand the test of time, and I only recently saw Black Hawk Down and Pearl Harbor there only recently, and watched a million times on, even 20 years on. Those three movies are constantly rewatched as well. And what are your memories of those three movies?
Well, you know what? It's the reason that The Perfect Storm was. I remember that I read the book.
Yeah.
About a year before. Somebody told me a year after I read the book, "Hey, they're making that movie, The Perfect Storm." I remember calling my agent and said, "Please get me in there to meet Wolfgang Peterson, the director. I really want to be in this film. I love the book." I met Wolfgang, and he said to me, "Listen, it's not a lot on the script right now, but hang in there, and I'm going to make it better." So that's how that happened, and I was such a fan of the story beforehand, so I'm really, really glad that worked out. And then I did this film called Armageddon with Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer.
And I just have to mention that, Bill. Apologies here, I had it on the different page, and my eyes skimmed over it, so I obviously have to come to Armageddon, such an iconic film, Colonel Willie Sharp, and apologies, that was the next question out of my mouth.
Yeah, well, Armageddon, I worked on Armageddon, and that's where I met Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer.
Yeah.
And then about a year after Armageddon, Michael asked me if I would play a cameo in Pearl Harbor, and there were three of them. He sent me the script, and he goes, "It's this one, or this one. You get to pick." So I picked the one in the beginning, and I'm only in it for one scene, but, I so enjoyed working with Michael and with Jerry Bruckheimer, who I ended up working with on 5 or 6 things over my lifetime so far with Jerry Bruckheimer, and I'm a huge fan of his. So that's how I ended up doing Pearl Harbor. And Black Hawk Down is probably one of the most, if not the most special experience that I ever had. Because it was Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And Ridley is just one of the classiest people that you will ever meet in this business, and such a brilliant director. But the other thing that happened in Black Hawk Down was, listen, you work on films, and you might work on it for a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, and it's, you meet a lot of great people in your life. But a lot of times you don't stay super close with those people just because life goes on. You go home or whatever. But I met 2 guys on Black Hawk Down, the Canadian actor Kim Coates, and and Australian actor Eric Bana. And those are two guys, we've been friends for life and will for the rest of our life. I talk to Kim Coates about every other day since 2001.
Wow.
And, you know, I met my best friend when I was 44 years old working on Black Hawk Down, Kim Coates. And we don't get to see Eric as much because he's from Australia. He doesn't get to L.A. as much as we wish he would. But you know, that's, you know, not only was it an amazing time and a great film and an experience to work on it, but, you know, when you meet your, you know, a couple of best friends forever, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, and I suppose we've been talking about three very serious movies there in Perfect Storm, Pearl Harbor, Black Hawk Down, and the thriller Armageddon. Now I'm going to bring you on to sort of light comedy humour, a sort of real throwbacks, a family sort of movie that 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, they all watch dozens year on year out. Anyone that follows the WE and Goldberg and the Great Khali and all that. The Longest Yard and Chris Tucker and Adam Sandler. I imagine it was a barrel of laughs from the beginning of shooting that movie right up until the very end.
Yeah, you know, listen, the reason I really wanted to do The Longest Yard was, you know, I was going to play like a football player.
Yeah.
I'm a big American football fan, but, you know, the whole sports end of it was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I knew that they were going to have some big guys and, you know, all these big, you know, pro wrestlers were going to play football players, and the whole thing was just a big romp. And, yeah, I mean, Adam was great. Chris Rock was great. You know, Nelly, there were a lot of interesting people that were involved with it. And, you know, just one of those, you know, it's funny. It's like, you know, that's a movie that, like, my younger son,
yeah.
you know, you know, he's like, oh, that's cool, man. I like that, Dad. It's cool.
Yeah.
To me, there's other things that, you know, have more meaning. But
Okay.
I do want to say this much. You said, you know, about, like, things that were lighter in nature.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times, you know, actors that play intense things, you know, people think of you as, like, you know, oh, my God, he's such a, you know,
Yeah.
mean, tough, bad guy. And the truth about it is, you know, I've probably done as many films that were light in nature as that were, you know, tough in nature. But, you know, listen, I love doing things like The Longest Yard because, you know, as I said earlier, it's great to mix things up, and I've never done anything like that before or since, so
Yeah.
I'm really happy about it.
And I suppose, Bill, I'm just going to, I suppose that sort of led on to my next question, but I'm going to pass in relation to the Blades of Glory, because I presume it's the same thing working with Will Ferrell and that. But I'm just going to move on to what I think was probably one of the greatest movies in the last 2 decades or so, still stands the test of time. We have seen Batman's movies in the past. They have flopped, they have come and gone, they have worked out. They haven't worked out for George Clooney, they haven't worked out for Ben Affleck to say the same. But The Dark Knight, iconic, doesn't do it justice in terms of that movie from start to finish. And everyone who's watched The Dark Knight is watching every country around the world. They know from head to toe every sort of storyline, everyone that's been in it. And for you, Bill Fichtner, you were in it.
You know, I'm going to tell you the story of how I ended up being in that film. I did this little comedy called The Amateurs, and I met this producer. His name is Aaron Ryder.
Yeah.
And Aaron produced Memento that Chris Nolan made, that film.
Okay.
So I'm buddies with Aaron, but I never met Chris. So we finished this film called The Amateurs, and my friend, this producer, Aaron Ryder, calls me up, and he said, hey, listen, I'm friends with this director. His name is Chris Nolan, and he called me, and he wanted me to ask you if you'd be interested in playing this one scene part. It opens up the film, this film called The Dark Knight. This is before they even shot the film, like a month before. So he gave me his number. I had a phone conversation with Chris Nolan. Never met him before. Super nice guy. And he said to me, listen, this is what I'm doing. It's the first thing that I'm going to shoot. And like a 7-month shoot, it's going to take me to shoot the film. But I want to shoot this scene first, and I'm going to shoot it with an IMAX camera.
Wow.
Which I think is the first time that a theatrical scene in a major motion picture was ever shot with an IMAX camera. And I'm going to shoot this scene. It's this bank manager with the character of the Joker that Heath Ledger is playing.
Yeah.
And would you be interested in it? And, well, like everything, I said, can you please send me the scene? I'd love to read it first. And so they faxed it over. I read it. I called them back, and I said, absolutely. And even though it was only a single scene part in the film, I love talking to him. And the script is amazing. And the scene that he sent over, I was like, you know what? I like this. There's something, I tend to do things, not because people think, you got to do movies like this. I do them because I think there's something special there. And that's how the whole thing happened. And I went to Chicago, and we shot that scene over 2 or 3 days, and that was it. And then I never saw it again until it came out in the theaters.
And lastly, before I leave that, what was your reaction when you saw the movie for the very first time yourself? Were you taken back?
Oh, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of watching myself, but I'll tell you what I remember, and I remember this when we shot the film. I swear to God, I remember when Heath Ledger, who's a very nice and very, kind of a quiet guy.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were shooting, and he came out, and we did the first take, and I thought to myself, well, it was probably even during rehearsal.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, because I'm a real fan, I love when actors do things that are just, challenging and different and out of the box and original. And I remember watching Heath and thinking to myself, that's really awesome. Whatever this guy's doing right now, I totally get it, and I think it's incredible. And I obviously thought the same thing when the film was finished. And Christian Bale is amazing as well. Everybody is. Everybody in the film. And especially Chris Nolan. He's brilliant. That's it.
And I suppose, Bill, I've talked about movies. I'm going to finish now a bit by talking about TV series. And I suppose 2 TV series that I want to bring. I suppose, Mom, I'm going to come to that last. But first of all, the TV series that most people remember you for. And I was speaking to Dominic. Dominic Purcell, a good mate of yours, only an Irish person like myself, only an hour ago, and he played Lincoln Burrows. You played Alex Mahone in Prison Break. Prison Break, watched all the time, watched every time. People, even to this day, 13, 14-year-olds, 30-year-olds are all watching Prison Break from scratch, and that relationship, and that struck me talking to Dominic, is the friendship that Dominic, Wentworth, yourself, all the cast seem to have. It seems to be strong, and there seems to be a willingness between you all, if there was a possibility to do another Prison Break season, that you jump at it.
Well, here's the interesting thing about it. Prison Break shot their first season when they were all in prison. At the end of the first season, which I got to be honest with you, I never watched it.
Okay.
I still haven't seen the first season. At the end of the first season, they break out. So my agent calls me, maybe this was like 2006, I think. My agent calls me and said, there's this show called Prison Break. They all broke out of prison. Now they're adding this new character. And I'm like, well, what are they going to do if a show's called Prison Break and they've already broken out? So I read the script, the first two episodes of season 2. The original one went 4 seasons. And I read them, and I read this character of Alex Mahone, and I liked it a lot. And I was like, I'm in. I want to do it. So we shot season 2 and 3 in Dallas, Texas, and season 4 back in L.A. But I went, and it's interesting because it's a band of guys that were together for a whole year, and then I kind of joined the party like a year later. Who's a guy that's after them. But listen, we're all in Dallas, Texas. We're not home. Most of us were back, from L.A. or at least living in L.A. now. And, you tend to get close to people when you're away for like 9 months and you're all working together in a foreign city. So there was a great camaraderie with everybody. And but what happened was then 10 years after Prison Break ended, about 4 or 5 years ago, they did a 5th season. I think it was 10 or 13 episodes or whatever, and I was not in that part. So I don't know if they ever decided to do more of it. They didn't call me for that for the second time, which is fine.
Okay.
But I have a feeling that's just going to be something that's going to be a great memory for what it was when it was.
Yeah.
But I will say this much. More people watch Prison Break today than they did originally when it was on television.
That's so true. Yeah.
All the streaming and everything that people do now, binge watching. I have people that come up to me that are 15, 16 years old. Kids come up to me and go, man, I love Prison Break. They were like 1 year old when we shot it.
I know, yeah.
So it's got a life of its own. It still lives.
And I suppose, Bill, that brings me on now to the current series that you're currently filming. We mentioned that there at the start you spoke about Mom and brought back memories of Grace Under Fire for you. Mom, is it a bit like a sitcom that's got a sort of modern sort of family sort of feel to it, that sort of light sort of humour that appeals to family touch, that you could have a teenage boy, a teenage girl, a mother, a father, a grandmother, a grandfather. It's sort of universal in a sort of nature that there's something in it for everyone.
Well, Mom is a very interesting show. Mom is about the 6 main characters now, because they added one, are these 6 women.
Yeah.
They're all from Alcoholics Anonymous. They're all recovering alcoholics, and the writing is so witty and so funny and kind of racy and kind of sexy. And is it for a 9-year-old? Yeah, I mean, a 9-year-old to watch it and laugh. But I'll tell you, it's just a really witty. Chuck Lorre and his group of writers, as we said earlier, they're about as good as it gets in the business. They truly are. And sorry, Bill,
you mentioned Chuck Lorre there. Is it a bit more like the 2.5 Men in terms of its content and its humour?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. Definitely. And it skews a little adult. It's anybody could watch it. Obviously they could, because it's on network television. It's not like cable where you can push the envelope and do crazy stuff. No, it's a network television show, but it is more like 2.5 Men, where it's super witty, super funny, very sexy, very funny, and I play a guy who's paralyzed from the waist down, who was a former stuntman. So I'm in a chair, and we all take that really seriously, and I'm really proud to bring this character to life. And I have to tell you though, now Mom is in its 7th season right now. Okay. But in season 3, when Chuck Lorre originally reached out to me, it was only to go on there and to do a guest spot for about 3 or 4 episodes.
Okay.
So that's what I did. That's all it was. I went to do the guest spot, and then when it was over, I guess they really liked the chemistry between me and Alice and Janie, because they called me up when the season ended a couple of months later, and they said, hey, what would you think about coming back on here full time? And now this is, 4, 5, 6. This is my 4th full-time season since then, which was not expected. So you never know how things are going to go,
Yeah, and I suppose, Bill, lastly, before we start to finish up, I suppose projects for you of the coming year, I suppose everything is sort of put on hold with the epidemic that the world is facing. You had a film in production, the Gettysburg Address. Was that still filming when this outbreak came upon us?
Which one is that? Which film?
The Gettysburg Address.
Yeah, no, that's actually something from a long time ago. It was kind of a docudrama series, but I never knew what happened to that. I did a voiceover for that about 4 or 5 years ago, and I never heard of what happened with it. But I will tell you this, I did want to share this. About 2 years ago, I produced, directed, co-wrote, and played the lead in a film called Cold Brook. It's a film that I made myself. It just got released a few months ago in November. I'm praying that it gets released over in Europe. It's on all sorts of streaming platforms here back in the States, on demand, iTunes, things like that. I don't know when it's going to open up there, but it is called Cold Brook, like running brook with water. And it's a beautiful little film about friendship and how far you go to help a stranger. And I wrote the film with a great buddy of mine. But I wrote it because I wanted to do something with Kim Coates, my buddy that I was talking about.
Okay, yeah.
That I met from Black Hawk Down. So Kim Coates and I play the two leads in it. You can look it up. I mean, you can look it up on the internet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where you can get it right now. I hope you can get it over there.
I'll check it out.
That's been, I have to tell you something. Of everything I've ever done in my entire life, that's the thing I'm most proud of. And since it came out in November, I've been working really hard with another friend on a new script that I want to make.
Okay.
A new film that hopefully, comes together in the next couple of years.
And I suppose, last 30 seconds now, Bill Fichtner, have you ever been to Ireland? And if so, what are some of your favourite memories of the Emerald Isle?
Let me tell you something. I was supposed to shoot a film there a year and a half ago, and it fell through right before we were going to go. And I was so bummed out because I've never been. That's not true. I was in Shannon once where I was on a plane, and they had to stop to refuel in the middle of the night, and that's about it.
That's about it. So it's on the bucket list, Bill.
I'm embarrassed.
I'm
embarrassed to say I'm going to make it there with my wife. We got to get our younger one off to college this September, and then I'm going to Ireland.
On that note, Bill Fichtner, a pleasure talking to you in this episode of Icons of Acting, looking back on a historic career, and obviously once this pandemic is over the whole world, more chapters left to be untold. Bill, a pleasure talking to you. Take care, mate.
Thanks so much, man. Listen, God bless everybody, you, your family, and everybody over in beautiful Ireland, and I hope everybody gets safely through this, and I'll visit someday. I can't wait.
Cheers.